The sound of thunder rolled across the Wyoming plains as rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the packed dirt road into a slippery river of mud. Katherine Kane clutched the letter to her chest, the paper damp but protected beneath the thin shawl that did little to shield her from the downpour. Her feet, bare and mudded, pressed forward with determined steps despite the stinging cold that shot through her with each footfall. Sheridan was still miles ahead, but she had no choice but to continue. The year was 1878, and Katherine had nothing left except the clothes on her back and a desperate hope that her brother's friend would honor a promise made years ago. Her family's homestead had burned to the ground 2 nights before, claiming the lives of her parents while she had been gathering herbs in the nearby woods. Even her shoes had been lost to the flames as she'd rushed into the smoldering ruins, searching frantically for survivors. Rain plastered her dark hair to her face as she squinted ahead, trying to gauge how much further she needed to travel. The letter in her hands was her only salvation and invitation from her brother Thomas before he died in the war, telling her to seek out his friend Jacob Winters should she ever need help. Thomas had described Jacob as the finest cowboy in all of Wyoming territory, a man of honor who would never turn away family of an old friend. The mud sucked at her feet, threatening to pull her down with each labored step. Katherine's dress, once a cheerful blue calico, now hung heavy and sodden against her shivering frame. She wondered if she might die out here on this lonely road, another unmarked grave in the vast wilderness. Then she saw him. A silhouette on horseback materialized through the curtain of rain, approaching at a steady trot. Katherine's heart leapt into her throat. Stories of highway bandits and unsavory characters haunted these roads. She froze, contemplating whether to hide in the tall grass alongside the path. But as the rider drew closer, she could make out the broad shoulders beneath a slicker, the distinctive shape of a cowboy hat pulled low against the deluge. The horse, a magnificent chestnut, slowed as its rider caught sight of her standing bedraggled in the middle of the road. "Miss." The voice was deep, concerned. "Miss, are you all right?" Katherine blinked rainwater from her eyes. "I'm trying to reach Sheridan," she called over the drumming rain. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and as he approached, Katherine could see his features more clearly, strong jaw covered in a few days' growth of beard, piercing blue eyes that regarded her with concern rather than threat. "You're barefoot," he stated, his gaze taking in her mud-covered feet and soaked clothing. Katherine nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. "Our farm burned. I have nowhere else to go." Without hesitation, the cowboy reached behind his saddle and pulled free a thick woolen blanket. He shook it out and stepped forward, draping it carefully around her shoulders. "Name's Jacob Winters," he said, his voice gentle as he secured the blanket around her trembling form. "And I can't in good conscience leave you out here to catch your death." Katherine's eyes widened. "Jacob Winters, Thomas Kane's friend." Now it was Jacob's turn to look surprised. "You know Thomas," her fingers tightened around the sodden letter. "He was my brother. I'm Katherine Kane." Recognition dawned in Jacob's eyes, followed quickly by a shadow of grief. "Thomas wrote about his little sister, said you were just a slip of a girl when he left for the war." "I'm 21 now," Katherine said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Thomas told me if I ever needed help." She hesitated, suddenly uncertain despite her desperate circumstances. Jacob nodded, understanding immediately. "And you do need help." It wasn't a question. He glanced up at the sky, the rain showing no signs of relenting. "We're still a fair piece from town. Can you ride?" Before Katherine could answer, Jacob had already guided her toward his horse. With strong, gentle hands, he helped her mount, then swung up behind her, one arm securing her safely against his chest. "Hold tight to that blanket, Miss Kane," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. "We'll have you someplace dry before you know it." As the horse began moving through the storm, Katherine felt something she hadn't experienced in days' hope. The solid presence of the cowboy behind her, the secure arm around her waist, gave her a sense of safety she'd thought lost forever. The rain continued its relentless assault as they made their way toward Sheridan, but Katherine no longer felt its sting quite so keenly. The blanket and Jacob's body shielded her from the worst of the elements. Despite her circumstances, despite everything she had lost, She found herself acutely aware of the man whose kindness had found her on that lonely road. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if he could hear her over the storm. His arm tightened slightly around her waist in response. "Thomas would never forgive me if I didn't help his sister," he replied, but there was something in his voice that suggested the gesture went beyond obligation. Katherine closed her eyes, allowing herself to lean back against his chest. For the first time since watching her home burn to ashes, she felt that she might survive after all. Jacob's homestead sat on the outskirts of Sheridan, a modest but sturdy cabin with a large barn and corral. By the time they arrived, the rain had slackened to a steady drizzle, but darkness had fallen completely, making the golden light spilling from the cabin windows all the more welcoming. "My foreman's wife keeps house for me," Jacob explained as he helped Katherine down from the horse. Her legs, numb from cold and exhaustion, nearly buckled beneath her. Without comment, Jacob swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the house as if she weighed nothing at all. "You don't need to," Katherine began, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Your feet are cut up something fierce," Jacob interrupted. "No sense making them worse." The door swung open before they reached it, revealing a plump, motherly woman with graying hair tucked beneath a neat cap. Her eyes widened at the sight of Jacob carrying a bedraggled young woman. "Land sakes, Mr. Winters, what have you found out there in this weather?" "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Katherine Kane. She's Thomas Kane's sister and she's in need of our help. Her family's place burned down." Understanding immediately, Mrs. Abernathy bustled into action. "Poor lamb. Bring her in by the fire, Mr. Winters. I'll fetch some hot water and clean clothes." The next hour passed in a blur for Katherine. Mrs. Abernathy took charge with efficient kindness, helping her bathe in a tin tub behind a screen in the kitchen, tending to her cut and bruised feet, and providing her with a nightgown and robe that had belonged to Mrs. Abernathy's daughter. "She's married and living in Denver now," Mrs. Abernathy explained as she brushed out Katherine's damp hair. "Clothes should fit you well enough until we can see about getting you proper things of your own." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. "You're very kind. I don't know how I'll repay you all." "Nonsense, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "Any friend of Mr. Winters is welcome here. That man's got a heart bigger than all of Wyoming, though he'd never admit it." When Katherine finally emerged from the kitchen, her feet bandaged and her body wrapped in the borrowed clothes, she found Jacob waiting in the main room. He stood as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes, a look that made her heart beat a little faster despite her exhaustion. "You look better," he said simply. "I feel better," Katherine admitted. "Thank you for everything." Jacob gestured to a chair near the fire. "Mrs. Abernathy's making up some hot food. You should eat, then rest. We can talk about what happens next in the morning." Katherine sank into the offered chair, the warmth from the fireplace seeping into her bones. As Mrs. Abernathy brought a bowl of fragrant stew, Katherine realized that for all the tragedy that had befallen her, fate had perhaps been kind in one respect, guiding her to Jacob Winters. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of reality that had been absent in the chaos of the previous day. Katherine woke in a comfortable bed, momentarily disoriented until memories of rain, mud, and a kind cowboy with a blanket came flooding back. She dressed in the simple day dress Mrs. Abernathy had left for her and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Jacob at the table, papers spread before him as he ate breakfast. "Good morning," she said softly. Jacob looked up, and that same unnameable something flickered in his eyes before he stood. "Miss Kane, did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in days," she admitted. "Please call me Katherine." Mrs. Abernathy bustled in from the pantry. "There she is. Sit down, dear, and I'll fix you a proper plate." As Katherine ate the hearty breakfast, Jacob cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about your situation. The way I see it, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need." Katherine set down her fork. "That's tremendously generous, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," Jacob interrupted. "Thomas was like a brother to me. We rode together with the cavalry before he didn't finish the sentence. Anyway, what I'm saying is that this place is plenty big, and Mrs. Abernathy could use the help around the house." Mrs. Abernathy nodded enthusiastically. "It would be a blessing to have another pair of hands, especially with young ones. The hands are always tracking in mud, and Mr. Winters is no better." Katherine felt overwhelmed by their kindness. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jacob replied simply, at least until you decide what you want to do next. Something about his steady gaze, the quiet strength he projected, made Katherine feel safe for the first time since losing her parents. Yes, she whispered. Thank you. Spring turned slowly to summer as Katherine settled into life at the Winters Ranch. The physical wounds of her ordeal healed quickly, but the emotional ones took longer. There were nights when she woke screaming, the memory of flames and loss too vivid in her dreams. On those nights, she would often find Jacob already awake, sitting on the porch with coffee, as if somehow sensing her distress. They would sit in companionable silence, watching the stars or the first hints of dawn, never speaking of the nightmares but finding comfort in each other's presence. During the days, Katherine threw herself into work, helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks and learning the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered she had a way with horses, much to Jacob's quiet approval. The first time she helped gentle a skittish mare that even his most experienced hands couldn't approach, Jacob's smile of admiration warmed something deep within her. Thomas never mentioned you were a horse whisperer, he said, leaning against the corral fence as Katherine stroked the now calm mare's neck. Katherine smiled. He left when I was 14. There's probably a lot he didn't know about me. Jacob's eyes held hers. I find myself wanting to learn all of it. The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning that neither was quite ready to address. Katherine looked away first, her cheeks flushing. Well, I'm still learning about myself, I think. As June bloomed across the Wyoming landscape, Katherine became an integral part of the ranch. The cowhands, initially wary of the boss's pretty houseguest, came to respect her quiet strength and unfailing kindness. She learned to ride like she'd been born to it, to mend fences, and even to help with branding when extra hands were needed. Jacob watched her transformation from a traumatized victim to a capable, confident woman with a mixture of admiration and something deeper that he kept carefully guarded. She deserved time to heal, to find her footing in this new life without the complication of his growing feelings. But sometimes, when their eyes met across the dinner table, or when their hands brushed as they both reached for the same tool, the electricity between them was impossible to ignore. The annual Sheridan 4th of July celebration brought the entire county together for a day of festivities, culminating in a dance that evening. Katherine had been to town several times since her arrival at the ranch, but never for something so festive. You should come, Jacob said as they finished breakfast that morning. The whole town turns out, might do you good to meet some more folks. Katherine hesitated. I don't have anything suitable to wear to a dance. Mrs. Abernathy, overhearing, clucked her tongue. Nonsense. I've been saving something for just such an occasion. Later that afternoon, Katherine stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself. The dress Mrs. Abernathy had presented her with was a lovely shade of green that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. It was modest but flattering, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was my Emma's, Mrs. Abernathy explained. From before she married, never wore it more than twice, and you're just her size. Katherine turned to hug the older woman. It's beautiful, thank you. When Katherine descended the stairs to where Jacob waited, hat in hand, the look on his face made her heart skip. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, his blue eyes wide with appreciation. You look. He cleared his throat. You look beautiful, Katherine. She smiled, pleased by his reaction. Thank you, you clean up rather nicely yourself. Jacob offered his arm, and as they walked to the wagon, Katherine felt a sense of anticipation bubbling within her. This wasn't just an outing to town, it felt like a beginning. The town square was transformed for the celebration, with bunting in red, white, and blue hanging from every available surface. A band played lively tunes as couples danced on a wooden platform constructed especially for the occasion. Children ran about with sparklers, their faces alight with wonder, while their parents socialized and sampled the potluck feast laid out on long trestle tables. Jacob seemed to know everyone, introducing Katherine with a pride that made her blush. She met the mayor, the sheriff, the school teacher, and countless ranchers and townspeople who all seemed genuinely pleased to make her acquaintance. So you're the girl Winters rescued from the storm, one older woman said, eyeing Katherine with interest. We've all been wondering about you. Katherine smiled politely. Mr. Winters has been very kind. The woman's knowing look suggested she thought there was more to it than kindness. Before Katherine could respond, Jacob appeared at her side, his hand warm at the small of her back. "They're playing a waltz," he said. "Would you care to dance?" On the dance floor, Jacob's strong arms guided her with unexpected grace. The rest of the world seemed to fade away as they moved together, their bodies finding a natural rhythm. "I didn't know you could dance," Katherine said, looking up at him. Jacob's smile was crooked, charming. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet." "Yet," Katherine repeated, her pulse quickening. Before Jacob could respond, a commotion at the edge of the square drew everyone's attention. A group of rough-looking men had arrived, clearly already deep in their cups and looking for trouble. "Damn," Jacob muttered, his arm tightening protectively around Katherine. "McDermott and his bunch, they work for the Blackwater Mining Company trying to push folks off their land." Katherine felt Jacob's body tense as one of the men spotted them and nudged his companions. The tallest of the group, a man with a cruel mouth and dead eyes, sauntered toward them. "Well, if it ain't the high and mighty Jacob Winters," the man drawled. "Heard you took an astray." His gaze raked over Katherine in a way that made her skin crawl. Jacob stepped slightly in front of her. "Evening, McDermott. Don't recall inviting you to our celebration," McDermott sneered. "Public gathering, ain't it? Besides, just wanted to meet the pretty little thing everyone's talking about." Katherine lifted her chin. "Mr. McDermott, I presume I'm Katherine Kane." The man's eyebrows rose at her composure. "Got yourself a spirited one, Winters. Better watch she don't run off like the last gal you courted." Jacob's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the sheriff appeared beside them, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. "McDermott, you and your boys might want to find somewhere else to spend your evening," he said, his tone pleasant but with steel underneath. For a moment it seemed McDermott might challenge the sheriff, but after a tense silence he shrugged. "Place is too dull for my tastes anyway." He turned to leave but paused to look back at Katherine. "See you around, Miss Kane." As the unwelcome visitors departed, Katherine noticed Jacob's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Who was he talking about?" she asked quietly. "The last gal you courted." Jacob's expression closed off. "No one worth mentioning. McDermott just likes stirring up trouble." Though Katherine longed to press further, she could see that the encounter had cast a shadow over what had been a perfect evening. The rest of the celebration passed pleasantly enough, but a barrier seemed to have formed between them, one that Jacob was unwilling to breach. The ride home was quiet, the silence broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional distant pop of leftover firecrackers. Katherine stole glances at Jacob's profile, outlined in moonlight, wondering about the shadows in his past. As they approached the ranch, she gathered her courage. "Jacob, whatever happened before whoever she was, it doesn't matter to me." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "It should," he said quietly, "because I made mistakes that I can't afford to repeat." Without another word, he jumped down from the wagon and came around to help her down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back, creating distance between them. "Good night, Katherine," he said formally, and then he was leading the horses toward the barn, leaving her standing alone beneath the stars. The following week brought a heat wave that baked the Wyoming countryside. Work on the ranch slowed as man and beast alike sought shelter from the relentless sun during the hottest part of the day. Katherine and Jacob circled each other cautiously, their easy camaraderie replaced by a tension neither seemed willing to address. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the heat broke. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and the first drops of rain were met with sighs of relief. The rain turned from blessing to threat, however, as it continued unabated for 3 days. Creeks swelled to rivers, and low-lying pastures disappeared beneath rising water. On the third night, Jacob and his men worked frantically to move cattle to higher ground as lightning split the sky. Katherine paced the porch, peering anxiously into the darkness for any sign of their return. When they finally appeared, soaked and exhausted, she ran to meet them, heedless of the downpour. "Is everyone all right?" she called over the storm. Jacob dismounted, his expression grim. "Lost a few head, but the men are fine. Johnson's boy took a fall, but nothing broken." He looked so tired, so burdened that Katherine acted without thinking. She reached up to touch his cheek, a gesture of comfort that turned electric when his eyes met hers. For a moment they stood frozen, rain streaming down their faces, something powerful building between them. Then Jacob stepped back, breaking the connection. "You should get inside before you catch your death," he said, his voice rough. Katherine felt the sting of rejection, but she nodded and turned toward the house. Behind her, she heard Jacob issuing instructions to his men, his tone once again the impersonal one of a boss rather than the intimate one of a man speaking to a woman he desired. That night, unable to sleep, Katherine slipped downstairs for a cup of tea. She was surprised to find Jacob sitting alone in the main room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He glanced up, and in the low light his face looked vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "Too much on my mind." Katherine hesitated, then sat in the chair opposite him. "Want to tell me about it?" For a long moment she thought he would refuse, but then he sighed. Her name was Rebecca. She was the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Katherine held her breath, afraid to break the spell as Jacob finally opened up about his past. "We were engaged to be married," he continued, his voice low. "But she wasn't content with ranch life. She met a man from back east, a businessman with fancy clothes and promises of city living." He took a swallow of whiskey. "She left without saying goodbye, just a note saying she'd made a mistake in accepting my proposal." "I'm sorry," Katherine said, her heart aching for the pain she saw in his eyes. Jacob shrugged, attempting nonchalance but not quite succeeding. "It was 5 years ago." "Ancient history? But it still affects you." His eyes met hers, startlingly direct. "It made me cautious, about trusting, about believing that someone could be happy with this life with me." The honesty in his words made Katherine's throat tight with emotion. "Jacob, not everyone wants the same things. Rebecca made her choice, but that doesn't mean everyone would choose as she did." "What would you choose, Katherine?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Katherine felt her heart pounding as she considered her answer. "I would choose peace over chaos," she said slowly, "honesty over pretense, and a man who would ride through a storm to help a barefoot stranger even before he knew who she was." Jacob's eyes darkened, and he set his glass aside, rising from his chair in one fluid motion. In 2 strides, he was kneeling before her, his hands gently taking hers. "I've been fighting this," he admitted, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "Telling myself it was too soon, that you needed time to heal, that I had no right." Katherine freed one hand to touch his face. "I think we've both done enough fighting, don't you?" When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was tender at first, almost reverent, but it deepened as years of loneliness and months of unspoken yearning fueled their connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected you," he murmured. Walking barefoot through the rain, looking like a half-drowned angel. Katherine smiled, her fingers threading through his hair. "I never expected to lose everything only to find something even more precious." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cozy ranch house, 2 hearts found shelter in each other. The following months brought changes to the Winters ranch. Katherine bloomed under Jacob's love, her confidence growing as she became not just a guest but a partner in the running of the place. Jacob, too, changed, the shadows in his eyes receding as he allowed himself to trust in their future together. They were married in October, as the aspen trees turned to gold against the mountains. The ceremony was held in the town church, with Mrs. Abernathy sniffling proudly in the front pew and Jacob's ranch hands cleaned up and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. "I, Jacob, take thee, Katherine," he vowed, his voice steady and sure as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. The look in his eyes as he spoke the ancient promises made Katherine's heart soar. There was no doubt, no reservation, only complete certainty. As they rode back to the ranch in a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by the townsfolk, Katherine leaned against her new husband's shoulder. "Do you remember that night you found me on the road?" she asked. Jacob's arm tightened around her. "Every detail. You looked like you'd been through hell, but there was such determination in your eyes." "I was so scared," she admitted, "but when you wrapped that blanket around me, I felt safe for the first time in days." He kissed the top of her head. "I knew there was something special about you even then." Though I'll admit, I didn't expect you to turn my life upside down quite so thoroughly, Katherine laughed. In a good way, I hope, in the best way, he assured her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I never thought I'd find someone who fits so perfectly here with the land, with the work. With you, Katherine finished, turning her face up for his kiss. Their first winter as husband and wife was harsh, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. But in their snug home, with fires burning and love growing, Katherine and Jacob found joy in the simplest things: shared meals, quiet evenings reading together, and the pleasure of learning each other's bodies in the privacy of their bedroom. Spring brought news that filled them both with wonder and trepidation. Katherine was expecting a child. "Are you happy?" she asked, watching Jacob's face carefully as she shared the news. His response was to lift her into his arms and spin her around, his laughter echoing through the house. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said when he finally set her down. "Are you feeling all right? Should you be resting? Do you need anything?" Katherine laughed at his sudden barrage of concerns. "I'm perfectly fine, Jacob. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." Despite her reassurances, Jacob hovered over her in the months that followed, much to the amusement of Mrs. Abernathy and the ranch hands. He insisted on hiring extra help so Katherine wouldn't strain herself, though she protested that pregnancy wasn't an illness. Their son, Thomas Jacob Winters, was born on a crisp November morning, with snow dusting the windowsills and a fire crackling in the hearth. The doctor had been summoned from town, but baby Thomas arrived too quickly, delivered by Mrs. Abernathy while Jacob paced outside the door, wearing a track in the floorboards with his boots. When he was finally allowed in to see his wife and newborn son, Jacob's hands trembled as he reached out to touch the tiny, perfect face. "He has your eyes," Katherine whispered, exhausted but radiant. Jacob bent to kiss her forehead. "And your stubborn determination. Did you hear him crying, loudest voice in Wyoming territory?" As their son grew, so did the ranch. Jacob's careful management and Katherine's shrewd business sense led to expansion, with more cattle, more land, and a reputation for fair dealing that brought buyers from as far away as Chicago. They weathered hardships together: a drought that threatened their livelihood, a fire that destroyed part of the barn, the death of Mrs. Abernathy's husband. Through it all, their partnership remained strong, each challenge faced together rather than alone. By the time Thomas was 5, he had a little sister, Emma Rose, named for Mrs. Abernathy's daughter, who had been so kind in providing Katherine's first decent clothes after her arrival. On the 10-year anniversary of the stormy night when Jacob had found Katherine on the road, they sat together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now a sturdy boy of 8, was teaching 3-year-old Emma how to lasso a fence post, with limited success. "Do you ever think about how different life might have been?" Jacob asked, his hand finding hers. "If your farm hadn't burned, or if I hadn't ridden out that evening," Katherine considered the question. "I believe some things are meant to be," she said finally. "Not that the tragedy was meant to happen, but that we were meant to find each other, one way or another." Jacob brought her hand to his lips. "Well, I'm grateful every day that you walked barefoot through that rain, straight into my heart." Katherine smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder as they watched the sun set over their land, their home, their life together. From tragedy had come joy, from loss had come abundance, and from a chance meeting in a storm had come a love to weather all seasons.